Hello, friends! Welcome to episode 228 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
You know, I would say this last week has had its ups and downs, but for the most part today I'm doing okay.
But we had a glass of wine.
We
got a
did.
belly full of burrito.
I may have had a little bit more wine than I should have, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
No,
It's therapy night.
I think it was, to say the least. I have a dear friend who is hundreds of miles away, unfortunately, at a funeral very much tonight. She lost her father, and I really wish I could be there, but under all the circumstances of everything that's been going on, I can't, unfortunately. But I will be here when she returns to help her decompress and handle that. But for tonight, I raised a glass to salute her father and her family for the losses, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. Thoughts go out to her.
And to the rest of us who all just need some time with everything. I feel like the last probably 30 days has been really odd for a lot of my friends and family, where they've been dealing with odd connections or just a lot of emotion or getting back into the swing of school and the things that follow that. I mean, most of my friends are out of school, but they have kids.
Yeah,
and those kids are in school or they're working with universities, and there's just a lot going on, and it creates a lot of tension. It creates a lot of disturbance because it's a restart of existence for some people.
Yeah. And
getting connected back into things. It's funny that we have that we get the questions of what game would you start at the beginning of a school year? Now that things are coming back into swing, as if it is the new year,
right?
January 1st again, and it does feel like that. Coming back into the school year sets that bar in motion. It's another disturbance, versus spring, which happens as a seasonal thing that we can all feel. It always feels like it's like a break, like an odd shuffle in the system of we gotta get back into this, kind of a thing.
No, I'm with you.
I talk to my friends who live around Ann Arbor, and they dread the end of August.
Oh, I bet.
Move in is just chaos, and you don't want to be in town.
Yeah.
If you're part of the university, it's pure terror, because you've got the people who are just starting out at the university who have no idea where anything is.
Yeah.
Maybe they missed orientation too. And then there's the parents who never came to orientation who are trying to direct the students who know where things are. We're like, no, honey, it's got to be over here. And they're lost. They're just lost. And I'm sure that happens on every campus. But when your campus is the downtown of a city, that makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, see, and we're spoiled living in the Detroit area because all of our major roads are just a big grid system.
Yeah.
On a big 1 mile grid. It's some of the best city planning I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But Ann Arbor is a web. It's just a maze. It's a labyrinth.
It really is. And it used to be
places.
a lot worse with one-way streets and crap. And
yeah.
I've been to a couple of college towns that are relatively well laid out, but so many of them are not. And they're just the campus is okay, but oh my god, everything else around them. And it's not just that Ann Arbor has U of M, right next to it is Eastern, right there.
Oh yeah, there's no escape.
That's right. You drive from one and you're immediately into the chaos of the other. So, and then it's not even an hour west, you're into another one.
Yeah.
So we're just dying for schools all bordered around each other in this damn state. So, but so I feel for all of you. I hope that everyone can take a moment, take a breath, and just try to reset a little bit as the chaos flows in, to remind themselves that Halloween is around the corner, and that's kind of okay.
Oh no, I avoid that. I avoid that. I don't get involved.
So. But so that's where I'm at right now. We have no new games that hit since the last time we had a show.
Yeah,
nothing's planned really at the moment.
Yeah, I think we gotta start having a conversation about October and see where people are at. I know we've got a friend coming in from out of town. And,
we do.
I am actually going out to a show in October, which is big. It's not big momentous news for most people, but I'm a terminal introvert and homebody, so I paid money to go out somewhere.
You made the choice to pay money to go out somewhere.
Yeah, we're gonna go see Taylor Tomlinson,
which I envy you.
Hilarious comic.
Hilarious. I follow her all the time. I've watched all of her shows. So no, that's gonna be a great show for you too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm really gonna enjoy that one. And,
yeah.
But other than that, though, no, we're kind of in a lull between games right now. But we'll get back to it in October and
Fair
stuff
enough.
like that, so
Fair enough.
Rob, why don't we mosey up here around the old microphone? Why don't y'all out there in listener land gather up around this here campfire, and we're going to tell you a story about a little game named Deadlands.
I need like a guitar. Dung, dung,
Just a little game named Deadlands by a little old company called Pinnacle Entertainment Group, otherwise known as Peg Inc. You see, back in the day, back in 1996, I don't know how long I can keep this up.
So yeah, Deadlands we're doing a system spotlight on Deadlands. Now, Deadlands is old for all intents and purposes. Now, I feel bad saying old because 96 was like some of the heart of my start of gaming.
Yeah.
But like between 96 and 99, we had Deadlands as like this odd custom rule set that was developed for, was it Deadlands on Rails or I'm trying to remember the original name.
The Great Rail Wars.
Yes. And it came out, I would say, in a kind of a light way. It really wasn't a full game deployment as we know it today, which was super common back then. Like, I want to say it, the first deployment that I remember seeing of it was in almost paperback form at a convention. This was in the heyday of like White Wolf's big deployments. We had Rifts was in full swing. Palladium was doing its craziness. Like, it was the heyday of new, different games that weren't D&D.
Yeah, I remember when it came out, and I remember hearing about it and stuff like that. I didn't know much about it other than it was Weird West. It was spooky Western with supernatural stuff in it.
Yep.
And I mean, a lot of games were that were coming out during that time were like, what if Real World but spoopy?
Yeah, I mean, White or Vampire the Masquerade did that.
Yeah,
they had Laws of the Night.
Yeah, and there was even Werewolf Wild West.
Yeah,
so I was like, okay, yeah, cool. Deadlands sounds great.
Yeah.
The thing I remember the most about it making a splash at the time, though, is because it was like, oh, this is a cool game. But get this, it uses poker chips and cards in addition to dice.
Ooh,
and
fancy.
I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting and fun and quirky. Manic Pixie Dream game.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And then, like everyone, when the 2000s hit around, the D20 version of it came out.
Oh, of course.
Like, if you were around during that time and you remember anything about going to the mall to the Wizards of the Coast store...
It was the original OGL release.
That's right.
So
everybody
there was
wanted
a gigantic splash of D20 games.
That's right. Everything was D20 at that point. Roll your D20s for everything. And then it wasn't until 2006 that the Savage Worlds Reloaded edition came.
Yeah. So it was its own proprietary rule set up until this point. And so Deadlands and Savage Worlds have always been like kind of inextricably intertwined. So Savage Worlds actually started out as the rules for Deadlands Great Rail Wars, and then kind of branched off into its own like little side set of rules where they kind of genericized everything, but kept like the poker chips became bennies,
which was a great idea,
and such like that. The card system is still what they use for initiative nowadays. You use action cards.
Yep.
And whatnot, but they kind of like
the genesis.
Yeah, they kind of strayed off from Deadlands, and it was in 2006 when they were like, you know what, let's just plug Deadlands back into Savage Worlds.
Yeah, because at that point, a lot of changes had been made to it because it had been play tested in a lot of other areas. Sure. And kind of came back around. It wasn't until a little over 10 years later that they did the 20th anniversary edition, and shortly thereafter in 2021. That we ended up with the Weird West revised that was under the Suede, the
Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. Yep, which is the most recent iteration of the Savage Worlds rules. So it's all up to date and got a new got a good old spit polish.
So when it first came out, it actually won a lot of awards and got a lot of praise for what it was, but was basically stated as like a fantasy cyberpunk wrapped in a Western garb, and that it only had a basic overview. It really didn't have a lot of personality like a lot of games do. just simple little blurbs about some geography, some politics, some city, some places, but there wasn't any adventures to it. And when they finally rewrapped it in 2021 and threw a bow on it, it became a complete game. And that's effectively what we're doing today, is what we're reviewing today, is that newly polished version of it. And I say newly because it's relative.
Well, I do want to mention, I mean, it's definitely in its best iteration. It's most polished version, up to date and everything like that. But this is not, I mean, you bring with it all that history.
Oh, completely.
And so there is a lot of lore and modules and expansions and stuff like that written for it. If you go up on Drive-Thru RPG, it's got its whole category to its own.
Oh, God, yeah.
Up there. So
Yeah, it almost feels like a completely separate game from Savage World. Like, this is its own thing. Don't try and include it, and yet you can see the drippings of everything Savage World within it, and blatant.
Well, which is ironic, actually, because we're going to start getting into, like, the dice mechanics and stuff like that, like, actually how to play Savage Worlds. If you're playing the most recent iteration, it requires the Savage Worlds core book.
Yeah.
It's an expansion on Savage Worlds. You
Which
can't
is funny,
play it without the core Savage Worlds rules. Now, mind you, it does have, and that's not to say that this is a small book. It's like 200 pages.
Yeah, it's significant.
It's significant. The artwork is good. The layout is phenomenal. It's very easy to read and such like that. But yeah, no, it's straight up Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. So much so that it requires the main book.
And I will say this going into the book, it is a well designed book, but it so much screams of the feel of where it came from. Like, when I opened this PDF and started looking at it, I could feel the genre timing of, like, when White Wolf started doing its books. Like, that feel. There was a certain thing that came out during that time of not only talking from the game's perspective, and including lore in that perspective, where, like, the book is having a discussion with you. Through the whole book, and the art reflects that feeling, so that you never really are ever stepping away from the setting. The setting is always engaging you actively. While you're reading through the book.
The rules will say stuff like, you cannot spend bennies on this. Ain't no cheating fate here, partner.
Yeah, and it's fun when a book can engage you in that way versus just verbatim reading you rule sets. Or saying when he or she does X, and then gives you an example. Everything in this is contextual. It keeps you wrapped within the setting, and I love that. I love that in a book.
It's contextual, but it never gets so far up its own keister that it becomes unreadable.
Right.
It's just enough flavor to keep you engaged, but not enough that it ceases to be a clearly readable rulebook.
Yeah, it's a step away from, I want to say, Shadowrun's second edition, where, like, there was so much jargon in places that you were like, I don't even know what these words mean.
Oh God, yeah. Well, that's just cyberpunk in general.
But that's the thing. Once you get embedded into a setting deep enough, the jargon just buries you into it.
Yeah.
And I do think that they take, like, one layer off of it.
Well, there's not a whole lot of jargon, anyways. I mean, really, we're just talking, American Southwest here.
Well, for us, we're talking American Southwest English, and English is already a bastardized language.
Well, that's true, I suppose. We're talking about non-American people.
Correct.
Calling people partner and knowing exactly what tone of voice that there book is written in.
Right. And there's phonetics. There's phonetics in this book that are written out, and you're like, what does that even mean?
Right.
So I would say if English is not your first language, this might be a struggle in some places, but not so horrifically.
Somebody over in England is like, my word, what is the functional difference between partner and pardner?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the rules here.
Sure.
So this is basically just core Suede. Okay. So your attributes and your skills are both referred to as traits. Functionally, they're no different from one another. All of your traits are measured in a die that goes from D4 to D12. And when you are asked to make a check with whatever trait that is, you are going to roll that die against a target number of 4. Any modifiers that are made to are going to be made to the roll, not the target number. Okay, and this is great because the static target number makes it so easy for players to understand when they have failed and when they have succeeded. A lot of times, like, we were playing D&D, you would roll, you'd be like, give me a perception check, and I'd roll, and I'd be like, 12? And I wouldn't know if that was good or not, because I wouldn't know what you were asking for the perception check for. I wouldn't know if there were any modifiers on the roll. I wouldn't know if there was what difficulty class you had up in your brain. I would just have to hope that 12 was good enough.
Right.
Savage Worlds, you can roll the die and just look me in the eye and go, oh, no. No, that didn't happen, and I rolled a 3.
Yeah.
Or, like, hey, yeah, no, I rolled a 5. Awesome.
Yep, exactly.
And I didn't tell you you're at -2 for anything, so a 5 wins.
Yep.
And
it's keeping that simplistic so that the players always feel like they're kind of in control.
Like they're in control
of their
the
destinies.
Yes, exactly. Now, dice can ace. Okay.
Explode, allow for rerolls.
Yeah, in a lot of games we call this exploding dice. If you roll the highest result on a die, hence a 6 on a d6, an 8 on a d8, you roll the die again, you add it to the previous total. So you roll a 6 on a d6, you've got 6, you roll it again, you get a 3, you now have a 9 on a d6.
Yep,
this means you can get things like a 34 on a d4, Erica.
Yeah, that does happen. That has happened.
That has happened more than once.
I rolled a 26 the other day on a D8. I think I did.
Yeah, something like that. And I want to say the Mad Elf rolled something up in the 20s on a D4 as well.
Yes, he did.
Low 20s, but 20s.
Still 20s with the D4. Rerolling D4 again and again and again.
Yep, and you get lucky enough.
Yep.
Now, in addition to all of that, you have two different kind of tiers of characters in this game. You have wild cards and you have extras. The player characters are wild cards. They are quote-unquote like the main characters of the story. Your major villains and larger antagonists, your boss battles and stuff like that, will all be versus wild cards.
Yeah.
Extras are dudes that get described as like henchman number 3 in the end credits of your game.
The bartender.
Bartender. Yeah, exactly. Whereas wild cards have names. They have stories. What the difference between the two of those is that you can take 4 wounds and not just 1, which makes combat very quick if you're fighting extras, because you can just pop 1 wound each and they go down. There's no grinding through hit points in Savage Worlds. But also, you have something called the wild die. Now, the wild die is an extra d6 that you get that you roll in addition to any other trait check. And you roll it on basically every check that isn't damage, I think. There's almost no situations other than damage which you don't roll the wild die. And basically what this is kind of you take one die or the other. Okay, so you don't add them together. But, like, if you've got a D8 trait in something, you're going to be rolling a D8 and a D6, and whichever one comes up higher, that's the one you go with. The theory being, in Savage Worlds, you either succeed because you are skilled enough to do it, or because you're the main character of the story.
Yep, that's what that D6 is.
And this whole thing leads to creating a very pulpy, very heroic-feeling story where the heroes are larger than life. And they succeed a lot more often than they fail.
And the villains get away with stuff.
And often, like, even against improbable tasks, you can do some really amazing stuff.
No, we've definitely seen it.
I would say this is not a game where you're going to have a very grim, dark feeling of the odds being stacked against you. This is, like, Savage Worlds is typically a style of gameplay where you feel very in control and very capable in the situation. And when you look the storyteller in the eye and you say, "I'm going to do something crazy," the storyteller should grin at you and go, "All right, let's do this."
Very much so.
All right, so that's just core Suede. That's just
easy.
Savage Worlds out of the book.
Yep.
There's a lot more rules to it than that. Combat is interesting and whatnot, but we already did a system spotlight in Savage Worlds a while back.
Yep.
If you want all the particulars ins and outs of Savage Worlds, we should listen to that.
Probably.
But the question is then, what is specific then to Deadlands?
Well, Sarah,
what does Deadlands bring to the table?
There we go. I'm not going to repeat.
All right.
But I will say that because it is the West, although weird West, you are still stuck in the pigeonhole of that you're human.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going so far weird that we're making up new races or anything like that.
No.
This is ostensibly one step away from our real world West.
Yep.
So human's the only thing available. You get a free novice level edge, basically for creating just like any humans out of the starter book would.
Yep.
You start by picking 4 points of hindrances. Hindrances are basically negative traits. They can be anything like bad habits or deformities or just any number of things. If you're just mean, if you're arrogant, personality traits and whatnot. Maybe disadvantageous circumstances, such as you're poor or something like that. You have bad eyesight. These are all hindrances. Hindrances come in major and minor. You want to pick 4 points of them. Minors are worth 1, majors are worth 2.
Yep.
You don't have to, but for these points, you get to cash them in for other benefits later to kind of balance your character out.
Yep.
And they're fun to role play.
Oh God, yes.
So, you should.
Can confirm.
Playing a character with no hindrances just sounds like the most boring thing in the world to me.
I think it is something that you grow into.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's something you grow into.
I encourage growing into it. Lean into it. Give your characters some Achilles heels.
That's right.
All right. You start off with your attributes. You pick. You get 5 points in them. There are 5 different attributes. You start off with a D4 in all of them, so there's no 0 attribute.
Right.
And then you can spend 2 hindrance points to put an additional point into an attribute during the step. Next, you move on to skills. There are a great number of skills. Though Deadlands does exclude hacking and electronics
for obvious reasons.
But they replace it. There is a new skill called trade, and that is a specific skill. You have to specify what trade you are.
Right.
So like blacksmithing or whatever. It's a trade you can apply to earn some money.
Yep.
It's the skill you have. You get 12 points to spend among these. Every point you spend raises that skill by 1 die type. It is 1 point to raise it up to an attribute. And because they're all linked to an attribute. So like fighting is linked to agility. Languages are linked to smarts, things like that. 1 point to raise it up to the attribute. 2 points to raise it above its attribute.
Yep.
The reason I really like this is because there's no dump stat in Suede. Nothing says that just because I have a low spirit, I can't have a really high persuasion skill.
Right.
And it's not even like my spirit is doing anything to give a bonus to my persuasion skill. I just roll persuasion.
Yep.
Right? So it's not like in D&D where it's like if you don't have a huge charisma bonus, don't bother talking.
Yeah, it's like the Ballad of Buster Keaton, where he's just this like geeky kind of weird looking dude, and yet he's rather charismatic.
Everybody loved him, yeah.
And he's super dangerous.
It's because you could hit him with a house, and he would just stand there and take it.
Yep.
But basically, what happens is that you to raise a thing above your skill level, it just takes a little more oomph to do it,
right.
or above your linked attribute. So you can absolutely build a character that has like a D6 in spirit, but like a D10 in persuasion.
Sure.
It takes a little extra effort to get there, but nothing is stopping you from being the big dumb fighter who's actually really charismatic and is the talker of the group.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Amos, I think, is in Expanse would have some interesting skills that sit beyond his attributes.
Just the intimidation level on that man.
Yeah.
But not like in the like I'm scary way, but just the I'm an unstoppable force. You might not want to get in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be some consequences to that.
Exactly. Right. Like his spirit may not be that great, but dear God, is that man terrifying.
Yes, exactly.
So
and again, here you can spend your hindrance points to increase your skills as well. It's 1 point per skill point.
Sure.
And then you get into edges. Now, edges are kind of like feats in, there's special abilities, basically.
Powers kind of feel,
So they're the fun little special rules that you get to tack onto the side of your character to make them feel, interesting.
Yeah.
You get 1 free one for being human, as previously mentioned. You can spend 2 hindrance points to purchase an edge. That's your typical thing, I think, during character creation, is 1 to start with, and then you spend your 4 hindrance points on 2 edges.
Right.
Because edges are, honestly, they're pretty powerful, and they're very interesting, too.
Oh, God, yeah.
in a lot of ways. So a lot of people will lean very heavy, I think, into edges. At least they do at my table.
It tends to be the thing that helps define the character more than even the skills.
Yeah, and especially in Deadlands, because this is where you get class-like abilities, and I say class-like because there are no classes in Savage Worlds.
Right.
It is a classless system, but some edges kind of define your character archetype. So archetypes like the Huckster or the Chi Master require a specific edge to give them their ability that defines those characteristics. To wit, you can't really play a Huckster unless you take arcane background Huckster. So you're only a Huckster if your character comes from the Huckster region of France. Otherwise, you're just a sparkling gambler.
Truth.
Yeah, but this is basically the only place you'll hear discussion of any sort of class. Otherwise, this is an entirely classless game. But technically, again, that's just Savage Worlds. All of these things get added as new edges, and there's a bunch of new hindrances. There is that one new skill and stuff like that, but really, again, that's all just Savage Worlds with a slightly different menu to choose from.
Yeah,
okay.
Which makes it very easy that if you've already been playing Savage Worlds in some other setting, moving into this for your players is not going to be that challenging.
Yeah, we're already this far into the spotlight, and we haven't gotten off of core Suede yet.
Yeah, we're still just talking about the basics.
All right, so what does Deadlands actually add to Suede that wasn't there to begin with? So,
I'm going to straight up say it gets weird.
It gets weird. So like we said, there's some new hindrances, new edges that are all Wild West flavored. Some directly interact with. They need to be new because they interact directly with like Deadlands specific mechanics like dueling.
Yes,
and such like that. And then there, of course, are the new arcane backgrounds for Blessed, Chi Master, Huckster, Mad Scientist, and Shaman. You've got gear and goods in here where you have not only a comprehensive list of Western gear, including all the shooting irons y'all could want out there.
That's true.
Both single action and double action with an explanation of which action is which. But also a detailed explanation of the weird steampunk tech that gets brought into this setting.
Yeah, I'll kind of get into that a little bit later.
Using ghost rock and ghost steel.
Yeah.
And the Hellstrom company that provides it.
Yeah, it's intriguing. It's intriguing. I would say that without getting too far into it, it definitely has Deadlands opened the eyes to other game creators of what Weird West can look like, and as we talk about it, you may think of a few other games that have come out after Deadlands that sound a lot like this.
We have a handful of new setting rules. Like I said, dueling. Dueling is one of them. I really like the dueling rules. So, dueling, I think, is something that's hard to implement.
Agreed.
You know, I'm a big fan of Scott the Miniature Maniac. He's a Miniac on Mini, as in miniature,
right?
Miniac on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he's been talking lately on his podcast about wanting to create a miniatures game of his own, but he wants it to be like 1v1 dueling.
Ooh.
And it gets me thinking a lot about like how would you implement that in game rules? Right?
Yeah, I mean, 7th Sea had rules for fencing dueling, which included all kinds of weaponry, and had some unique approaches to it.
But those gunslinger duels have a very particular style to them.
Very much so.
Where you've got the square off.
Yep.
You know, and you got two people at high noon out in the street in front of the saloon, looking each other in the eye, their fingers just twitching over their 6-irons, right? Yeah. And then there's just a moment where one of them just blinks or twitches, and they both slap iron. They both slap leather, and
the
pull their
shots,
guns, and it's over like that. There's just 2 shots ring out, and then one of them just falls over.
It's the samurai pass.
Yeah.
It's that quintessential speed moment.
Yeah. And there's so many. We could talk for an hour about the parallels between samurai drama and westerns.
Completely.
But we're not.
Not doing that. That's not today.
But we're not gonna. But it's there, and you should think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But Deadlands brings us a great set of rules for this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 3 rounds
Mm-hmm.
for a duel. Okay, once you've decided you're in a duel, you abide by these rules.
Right.
You can't just be like, we're not in a duel anymore, and then break them.
Nope.
Okay, so we're in a duel. This is a duel scene. Each duelist gets dealt a hole card.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as in an ace in the hole.
Right.
Right. You're gonna keep that face down. You're gonna keep it in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna know what it is, but nobody else will.
Mm-hmm.
First 2 rounds of quote unquote combat here, you can do anything except attack.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great place to get things in like tests,
Mm-hmm.
where you will try to psych your opponent out, maybe make them distracted or vulnerable.
Right.
If you do, it doesn't wear off next turn. It stays through all 3 rounds.
Right. It carries.
Okay. It carries. So there's no like, I have to do this on the 2nd round, so he's hit with it in the 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it, you do it.
Yep.
Okay. Raises on these tests, normally if you test
Hit
somebody
with a raise. Yeah.
you can either make them distracted or vulnerable, which are debuffs basically. But if you get a raise on that roll, which is 4 higher than you need,
right.
You would also make them shaken. And here, they're not shaken, but you can either take another whole card yourself or make them discard one of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And this becomes important because remember I said there are new edges that interact with some of these rules.
Right.
A talented duelist may start the fight with 2 or 3 whole cards.
Yeah.
So testing them to make them start discarding them. And they're discarded at random, too. So it's not like they just throw their lowest one and,
right.
whatever. So there's kind of this like moment where you're psyching each other out. You're reading each other. You're trying to get the measure of them, see how they're moved, see how their stance is and such like that.
Yeah.
And this interacts with not only the debuffs you may or may not place on one another, but the amount of hold cards you end up with at the end of these turns.
Yeah, for those of you who've played tournament Magic the Gathering and stuff like that, or any of the card games where you've got a hand of cards in your hand that can be plucked from, and rules fall. It's that same feel where you're like gauging what's in their hand versus what's in front of them, and the terms that are basically on the table between you, and it's an exciting time.
Yep. Turn 3, the guns come out.
The reveals.
The duelist will reveal their whole card of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If you have more than one, you can choose. It's usually going to be your highest, but there may be some weird fringe reason why you would want to choose a lower one, if it interacts with another rule or something like that, or if you're trying to psych your opponent out for some reason, if you got some weird plan, you're not obligated to pick your highest one.
Right.
You almost always want to, though.
Right.
All right. That becomes your action card. It's essentially your initiative for the turn.
Right.
So, you want to get as many whole cards as you can.
Mm-hmm.
You want to hang on to your highest.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to have more than one when the guns come out.
Yeah.
Okay? You flip them over. Then you see who goes first.
Yep.
And that person gets to shoot.
Yeah.
Now, during this round, you also you can go on hold and try to interrupt your opponent. If you want, you're not obligated to shoot at that point. If you've got additional hold cards that are higher than your opponent's, i.e. like they flip a 5, you flipped a 10, and you've got a 7 behind it, you get an extra d6 damage.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, that doesn't sound like a lot, but in Savage Worlds, your damage dice can explode. They can ace. So an extra d6 means that's an extra die that can potentially ace.
And all add up.
And all adds up at the end, yes. Yep. And you also cannot soak, which is usually the rule that you use in Savage Worlds. When you take damage, when you take an extreme amount of damage, you can roll your Vigor stat and try to reduce that amount of damage if you spend a Benny, if you're a wild card to do this. Not being able to soak in this one particular round, when you know someone is going to be shooting you with a firearm, is a scary, scary thing, and it turns very lethal very quick.
Well, I mean, if you were to even think about that in the terms of like other game systems where it's like if you're doing a standoff against an enemy and it's an attack that cannot be, like, the damage can't be mitigated. It's just there.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lot. Like, it would change pretty much everything about any other game. You know, that becomes a very important maneuver to do.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the things that this game did exceptionally well over other dueling games, where the dueling could be mitigated or adjusted in some other way because it wasn't necessarily that important, whereas in this game, death is kind of a very important part of it.
It really is.
And it sits at a special place even in the lore of the game. We'll get to that, but it sits right there, so...
Yeah, the base level of lethality in Savage Worlds sits at a really interesting place too. I think, since it doesn't operate off of hit points, it operates off of wounds.
Right.
A lot like 7C does.
Yes.
You've got a very finite amount of damage that anyone can take.
Yep.
And even a legendary wild card, if they don't have a good vigor or any edges that modify it, you can just stab them with a butter knife and kill them.
That is true.
You know,
you could get a really good hit and they could go down.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you know, we play fantasy, but like even the lowliest goblin, if I ace enough times on a hit, I can take out the plate mail wearing warrior. You know, easily.
Yeah.
So after that, then after the guns come out and that first round of firing, all bets are off.
Yeah.
You can run combat like normal. Maybe that's the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it was just two regrettable gunshots. One person falls over. Maybe they're both wounded. Maybe it's a double kill. Who knows?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But after that, it just goes into combat as normal or the scene, you know, ends or whatever.
Right.
But I really liked those rules.
No, I think those are some of the finest dueling rules, and a lot of systems could learn from the general feel and movement of those rules and how they integrate. But everything else just feels within combat like setting.
Yeah.
You've got hangings, which happen.
Hangings happen. Yeah.
Stampedes are an environmental thing. And, like, when I saw stampedes, I'm like, why isn't this in more games?
Rules for stampedes, right. Like
the animals exist in other games. Why aren't there stampedes? You know?
Who knows?
Apparently they don't stampede in D&D. Nothing stampedes.
All right, then you get your arcane backgrounds, and I think this is another place where Deadlands injects just an absolute ton of flavor.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely tell how it's swayed at its core. Like, all the mechanics are there. If you squint enough and file off some of it, you're like, it's swayed, but it's flavored swayed.
Right.
So
now, Savage Worlds is a generic system. Okay, so they use a lot of generic terms that are portable between all the different settings and whatnot, because there are basically certain game mechanics that are always similar to one another, no matter which game system you're using. Powers and arcane backgrounds is essentially how Savage Worlds describes things like magic. Now, powers don't always mean magic. Sometimes they mean superpowers. Sometimes they mean psionics. Sometimes they mean outlandish gadgetry.
Yep.
But these are special things you can do that do neat tricks.
Yeah, and Deadlands does a good job of flavoring these things to match the weird west that it sits within.
Exactly. And herein comes your arcane backgrounds. Now, an arcane background is basically just an edge that says you have a certain access to a certain type of powers. Okay. So your first one is blessed. Now, this is your typical, like, man of faith. Okay? You're like wandering preacher man whose faith in God is the only thing that beats back the darkness of the night. If any of you were lucky enough to catch Undead Wood by Critical Role while it was still available, unfortunately it is no longer available. There was some weirdness with Brian Wayne Foster that was unflattering, and they wanted to dissociate themselves from him. So
story way to handle it.
So they took that media down because it featured him as storyteller.
Yeah.
Which is disappointing because it was really good. But if any of you saw that, Travis Willingham's character was a blessed character.
Yep.
So basically, this gives you access to holy miracles. I mean, it doesn't outright say that you have to be Christian.
Right.
I think that's probably the indication, but, there's nothing stopping you if you've got strong enough faith in whatever,
Yeah.
But it's faith in a divine that gives you this power.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got the Huckster.
Oof.
The Huckster is my all-time favorite spellcaster ever.
Now, I'm going to preset this with the idea that, yes, the Huckster involves the use of cards. They are not Gambit. That is not what is being talked about here.
Kinda.
I'm putting it out there that they're not.
They're not really, but they kinda are, but they're not really.
Yeah. So, the idea behind the Huckster was that they are working with cards as a means to power.
Well, it's not always cards, and that's why they're kind of not Gambit.
Well,
Hucksters are gamblers.
right.
So, way back in the day, in the 1700s,
Way back in the day.
late 1700s, there was a man named Hoyle. Yes, that Hoyle.
If you
look at your deck of cards, that Hoyle
Mm-hmm.
was actually a very powerful mage.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of discovered that you could not only access certain powers out there, but that you could essentially gamble with spirits to bid for more power to pour into your arcane works.
Yeah.
Now, he knew he couldn't just publish, Hoyle's Manual of Arcane, Spellcraft, because he would be locked up as a crackpot and probably, killed.
Mm-hmm.
So what he did was he kind of encoded it. And he put out Hoyle's Book of Games instead.
A legitimate actual book.
And a legitimate actual book you can go out and buy right now.
Yeah. It's been revised.
Yeah. You have to get the 1769 version of it, I believe, because the revisions have moved around certain pages and references and stuff like that, and it doesn't have the same coding that it did back then. But using the sample scores as numerological charts and stuff like that, if you knew what you were looking at and you knew how to read the book, it would teach you spellcraft.
Mm-hmm. Not to say that any of this is fact in any way.
And that is the basis of what a huckster is someone who understands Hoyle's card-based or game-based magic. Okay. Now, Doc Holliday, yes, that Doc Holliday, took it one step further. He was a sort of disciple of Hoyle's, and he made up his own little iteration on this called hex slinging, otherwise known as trigonometry. And that was scribing runes into your shooting iron and firing magic bullets with it and whatnot.
Doing interesting things.
There's also another edge you can take if you've got a huckster, the arcane background huckster, that allows you to have Wheatley blood. And those of you who know your H.P. Lovecraft will recognize Whately as Wilbur Whately from Shadow over Innsmouth, I believe. Owner of the Necronomicon.
Yes.
And offspring, I believe, of Yog-Sothoth?
It's a little gray.
Something like that, yeah. So there's a lot of lore built into the huckster. But what's even better is the rules. So they're just like any other spellcaster, right? They have a list of powers. They can use their power points to activate those powers and cast spells with them.
Yep.
Nothing more complicated than that. Except you can spend a penny to ante up to a game. And in your mind, this only takes a turn in-game, but in your character's head it can take minutes, maybe even hours. You find a spirit, and you engage this spirit in some sort of a game. It doesn't have to be poker, though we are going to be using poker as the mechanic. Some play mahjong, some play bridge. It doesn't matter.
Right.
The fact is you are playing a game to gamble with the spirit for more power. What you can do basically with this, though, is you can cast spells, anything off of the huckster spell list, even if you don't have access to that power normally.
Or the power points to do it.
Yes. So what you do is you make a gambling roll. And depending on whether or not you succeed in that gambling roll, and how well you succeed, if you get if you pass, you get 1 extra card. If you raise, you get 2 extra cards. If you fail, nothing happens. You just don't get any extra cards. If you botch, you still don't get any extra cards. The game continues as normal, but then after everything is resolved, you roll on the backlash table.
Right, because something's gonna happen.
Something's gonna happen, but that doesn't stop the game from being played.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love the concept of it because it's that break from reality for that character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that doesn't affect anyone else, and kind of just effectively at the table pauses the scene, but in truth, everything's continued on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, you deal out a poker hand. You give them 5 cards, plus any bonus cards they may have picked up with that gambling roll.
Mm-hmm.
From that, they make the best poker hand they can.
Yep.
And there's a chart, and it basically says, okay, here are the power points that you would have available to you. If you've got a really good hand, it can do things like cast it with extra modifiers, so do things like double damage or double the effect of the spell and whatnot.
Yep.
You can only cast the spell with the power points you win at that game.
Yep.
You can't fuel it with any of your own. So if it's not enough, you have to pay in a deficit, essentially, out of it's a difficulty of your roll.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's an additional difficulty for any rank higher required that the spell is. So, like, if you're trying to cast something that requires veteran, but you're only novice, you know, there's a stacking modifier for, like, reaching so high above your weight class.
Yeah.
You can, now mind you, if you end up with extra power points, you can reduce that penalty.
Yeah.
You can reduce the difficulty of the roll as well, or you can just dump them into your own PowerPoint pool.
Yep.
They're free. Just take them.
Yep.
And if you get a Joker, you get your ante back.
Oof.
But basically, after that, you either have a bunch of difficulty, or you have a bunch of modifiers to your roll. You make your spellcasting roll as normal, and you abide by the chart.
Yeah, it is probably the most complex addition to the system.
Yes, definitely.
And I would say for anybody who is going to run this game, as neat as it is, don't have more than one at the table.
Don't have more than one huckster. Yeah, I would say read the rules 2-3 times. Maybe go through some example things so that you can do it smoothly, because it definitely is a complex. Like, it's its own individual thing that you need to put a break in your game to do.
Yep.
But man, does it sound fun.
It does sound fun. And as much as I would think it's a neat mechanic, I could see it totally ruining the groove of certain scenes. Like, I would say you can't use it as much as, like, you know, every single time, which some players would want to do.
Well, you have to spend a penny to do it. You can't.
Well, I also had a stack of 8 bennies by the time I was rolling through your game.
That's because we were flipping a lot of cards and there were a lot of jokers coming out.
But what I'm saying is that if you did this even 3 times a game, which 3 bennies is not hard to gain.
That's fair.
In a system.
You start with 3 bennies.
Right. That's like 3, and I'll be conservative here, 5 to 10 minute private moments between a game master and an individual player to get through that thing.
I don't know if it would take 5 or 10 minutes, but...
I'm squinting at you.
Oh, I see you squinting at me.
Do you know why I'm squinting at you? Because there's certain players at our tables
because you think I'm
look
full of crap
at the rules in high detail.
That's true.
And because that's how they play. We have players who play very mechanically.
That's true.
And there's nothing wrong with that, to do that. But the trick is, like you said, make sure you go over it with that player so that when you get to those moments, you can make it 5 or less.
Yeah. Like
that it's quick.
Have the huckster spellcasting chart, like, just printed out on a card.
Ready to go.
And sitting there ready to go. Yeah. Because
don't have your deck too far away. Not that this game would ever let you have a deck too far away.
Yeah.
But understand that this section of the rules specifically is really cool, but also could be a huge hindrance and slowdown for everyone else at the table.
Yep.
So,
and then finally, like, we've got the Chi Master, which is basically mystical martial artists. It's kind of that, Asian martial artist trope of, like,
it's a mixed power set.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a generalization. The mad scientist.
Mad Scientist is really cool because that's just, like I said, where you bring a lot of that steampunk sort of style to the thing.
Which I think is just, it feels to me more like it's a nice wrap of a power to give it a reason and flavor. No different than like, this is my ray gun.
Yeah.
Okay, you have a ray gun. What's it do? It does damage to people. Okay.
Wasn't like Kevin Kline's character in the movie Wild West? Wasn't he like a mad scientist gadgeteer?
Effectively,
sort of guy?
yes.
Yeah.
Sits within that same thing. I have a jetpack, kind of a thing.
Knox in the Box says, I did not expect a Chi Master in Wild West.
Yeah.
Actually, Chinese characters in Wild West are actually pretty common.
Yes.
Because there were a lot of Chinese immigrants used to build the railways across to basically connect California with the East.
There's a lot of history there to be discussed.
Yeah.
But needless to say, there were many immigrants. Many.
Yes.
Often not wanting or understanding that they were there for that reason.
Yep.
So, and then finally, shamans.
Yeah.
Which fit within the Native American section of society within the Deadlands setting.
Yeah.
And they predominantly focus on the Sioux Nation as kind of their backbone of where they got a lot of the information and design from.
Yeah. The Native Americans in this setting actually have like one or two independent states like that are just them.
Yeah, there's if you're familiar with some of the history that Shadowrun brings in, you'll definitely get some of the same feels that were pulled into this game from that same concept of ghost dancers and appropriation of those stories and histories and lore that exist within those Native American tribes and nations, and I guess this is a good enough point to put it in since we just talked about both of those, and shift a little bit into setting and story. Because I'm going to open up a little bit with the discussions that we traditionally have. Now,
yeah, sure.
For those who are familiar with history and know the time period of the 1880s up through the late 1880s or 1890s, know that time period was not kind to women, was not kind to non-Anglo white Saxons, and that slavery was predominant. And this game doesn't hand-wave that. They basically flat out say, like, that's not important to this setting. Don't bring it in.
Yes.
And that's a great start point, in my personal opinion, is that the way they explain it is basically like, the war sucked for everyone. Everyone was needed, and because of that, it changed the face of reality for women, for minorities, and slavery was gone.
Yeah. Plus, there's this whole hell on earth aspect that we'll get into in a moment here that kind of makes people go, you know what? We have bigger things to worry about than the color of this man's skin.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that was a great way for them very quickly to say, that's the adoption that we want to take. We're literally just gonna walk away from that whole concept because it is unnecessary for these storytelling. That is not
people
what
were
saying.
Crap in the 1880s. You don't have to be.
Correct.
Let's move on.
Unfortunately, and I think this was more a product of the time period of when this game was created. During the heydays of the just before 2000s, in the late 1990s. When game creators were designing these games, there was a surgence of grabbing of material from all over the world that was interesting. Historical pieces, cultures, traditions that were neat.
We had a lot of people who wanted to seem like they were multicultural and stop telling stories about just white people, but it was white people wanting to be multicultural and didn't do a lot of homework or a lot of sensitivity, work.
There was a general lack of respect when taking these pieces of heritage, and incorporating them into effectively, and I'll flat out say it, white stories.
Yep.
Deadlands is a predominantly white story. You can read it page for page, and without much loss feel that. And that is not to say that this is a game that shouldn't be played. It is just to be understood that when it was designed, these feelings were in it, to the point where they state, and I'm going to read it verbatim, GMs are encouraged to research other Native American cultures and tailor edges to particular customs and beliefs. That isn't a very nice way of saying, like, you should do historical research and what terms and things that we're using here are generic. No, they literally did light research of the Sioux Nation, grabbed a bunch of reference points, basically, from history books that were written by white people, and said, these are neat terms and ideas. We think we're being respectful, when they were expropriating it from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's... Don't get me wrong. I don't want to dwell too long on this, because
No.
I don't think it's a huge, like, it's not a game breaker or anything like that. But
No.
Just understand that there are certain things you're going to probably read in this setting and go, okay, that's a little tropey.
Yeah, and I'm going to say it. All of these people are heroes. They have not done anything to throw a negative light.
Oh yeah. The Sioux Nation aren't like villains or anything like that. Like,
and I'll say it. They were careful to use the term Indians in quotes, and to make sure that you're aware that that is a term that was used for the time period, not for reality. That we are understanding that these are Native Americans.
Yeah.
That they have that they are independent nations, and that we are trying to get a feeling for the time period and be respectful as best we can. I think if it was written today, there would be a little bit different feel in there. But I'm also going to say that for the most part, I feel that it for what it is good. And I'm going to kind of leave it at that. The term shaman, the term chi master, I think are hurtful to a degree, but not so much that they harm the content, that these are heroes, and that they were, they were trying to do their best to write this and try not to do it in a negative light. They weren't saying that, that these people were lesser. There is no caste system in this game.
Yes. In fact, they go out of their way to say, like, look, none of that racism crap exists here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or classishness. Now, I'm going to step away from that and say the one thing that I will say about this game, and that is this setting sets fear as a paramount point.
It was a lot spookier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
I got to admit, I was not ready for the level of spoopy.
Yeah, and Weird West is an interesting way to explain how the setting generally feels to the populace, but the truth of the matter, and I really do think that this fits in a lot of Western feel, is the moment you step away from the traditional wiles and vials of posses and gangs and heists and things like that, the next general step is the unknown of the West. And the unknown of the West in this game is known. It is that behind the veils of the darkness that is out there, of this untamed wilderness, is the fact that there are only two things you have, and that is hope and fear. People either have hope in their town, or they have fear of what's going on around them. And the game is kind of wrapped in that concept, that that fear has a cost and a weight within the world that changes the balance between good and evil. And through that, you have this monstrous existence of the Reckoners and the reckoning that is coming. And I think right there should tell you enough about how this is happening and where the base concept of this comes from, is that the reckoning is the end of times, but as in hell on earth.
Yeah.
They're literally attempting to change the face of the earth by making places a hell on earth. A fearful, horrific space of where the evils of those who have fallen, and were evil in their hearts and their souls were damned, are back. And walking or haunting or infecting the land around them.
Yeah.
And
that's kind of where the name of the game actually comes in, is if an area of the land, if the people are fearful enough, if there's just no hope to go around and things like that, the landscape actually begins to change to reflect that in this reality. And if it gets bad enough, you end up with a landscape that is literally hell on earth, and it's called a Deadland.
Yeah, skulls may be replacing rocks.
Yep.
You'll be walking along, and you'll think you have just crushed a bit of clay under your foot, and you look down, and it's bone.
Mm-hmm.
The
shadows are long and stare at you with unearthly eyes, and the sun never quite lights things up, and it's awful.
There's a certain level of madness to people as well. You don't know whether they're in it for the greed or in it for the purity of murder and mayhem, and you can see that in some of the Western stories where you'd have a hero come into town and kind of madness wraps around them with a few good people trying to eke out their lives. Mm-hmm. That is the feeling that they're going for here, but then wrapping that whole thing in this almost demonic blanket. That has happened, the reasoning for it.
And what I really like about this particular setting, how the setting is wrapped up in an interplay, like a war between hope and fear, is that, one of the big questions when you're creating a setting is, what do your players do in it?
Yeah. And
you started off with that quote from 1996 where the player was like, where the guy was like, it's a neat idea, but like, what do you do with it? And I think, especially this most recent iteration of Deadlands really explains that for you, and that is, your characters bring hope. Whether they're heroes or anti-heroes or lovable scoundrels or whatever, what you are doing, whether by choice or by circumstance, is beating back the things that go bump in the night and making the people that you interact with realize that maybe not everything is terrible, and maybe we shouldn't give up.
Yeah. And then you tie that to the traditional stories that we all know from Westerns, and it fits. Yeah. It fits so well, because at the end of those stories, it's about hope. It's about, taking off your hat and putting it on the little kid and giving him a little scruff.
Yeah.
And then, riding off into the sunset, because that story gives them hope that there are others and that they can be like them.
Exactly.
That they can bring hope to their area.
And, you've got Bad Bart the Bandit who's coming to town to terrorize the people, but, like, maybe this time around, Bad Bart the Bandit isn't just a mean dude. Maybe he's a herald. Maybe he's come back from the dead. Yeah. And he's gonna, and hell's coming with him.
Yeah, or like something's happening to the cattle. Okay, well, what is it?
El Chupacabra.
Yeah, some demon is out there drinking the blood of the goats.
That's not just an old wives' tale. No, literally, there is an old demon out there.
Yeah, but the thing is, the people don't know it.
Yeah.
They are extras. They're just there to be the setting. You might have one or two people in town who are either working with or maybe interested in seeing that Chupacabra, continue to terrorize the town.
Oh, sure.
Because it gives them a leg up.
It's eating, Billy Bob's goats. And
That's right.
I'm trying to move in on his land, and if he ain't got no goats, he ain't got no land.
That's right.
And maybe I can just scoop it out nice and cheap from underneath him when he has to leave town. Well, of course, if you let that monster go, it's not gonna just focus on that land. It's
gonna keep right on going.
Exactly.
So there's this concept that sits within that of these reckoners, they're servitors who are doing this work,
which are basically archdemons.
Yeah,
right?
So they sit at a glass ceiling, unlike D&D has, where it's like, oh, I'm level 20, I'm going to go punch God because he has stats. These characters don't have stats. Yeah. They don't sit at the level of a player. They're above
conceptual.
It. Right. You may hurt them. You may ruin their physical form, but in the end, tomorrow they will be back as another soul.
Well, I don't think the Reckoners can even take physical form. I think they're stuck in the hunting grounds, and that's why they're trying to create Deadlands.
Well, I mean, the Servitors are the ones who will return regardless.
That's true, yes.
They're reborn again and again like freaking Angelus.
Servitors are like their lieutenants, and then you've got Manitos, which is an old Algonquin word.
sounds correct.
Algonquin, I want to say, for spirit.
Right.
There's up by Traverse City. There's South and North Manitou Island.
Yes.
So that's where I know that word from, here in Michigan. But yes, but then a lot of the things you're going to be dealing with are called Manitous, which are basically evil spirits.
Yeah, like a gunslinger who murdered a bunch of people ends up damned. Like, he makes the deal with the damned to come back.
Yep.
And his evilness returns. Now, he may return as the voice and like second mind in another evil person who may have gotten shot but didn't die.
Well, they died,
right?
But now they're still back,
right?
The undead, the harrowed.
That's right. And so now you've got like this effectively undead that is being ridden by a demonically, evil soul. Doing even worse things.
They need to drink copious amounts of alcohol to keep themselves pickled so they don't smell like rotting corpses.
Oh, it's terrible.
There's such cool flavor in there for it.
But then you also have just like walking nightmares that exist.
Yeah.
Where like, the servitors might just make some, I don't know, werewolves.
That's the last part of character creation is like, what's your darkest fear? No particular reason, we're just asking.
Exactly. But the whole thing of it is that you have this giant kind of demonic flavor that's sitting around the reason of why the dark is so dark.
Yeah.
And why that fear is always just around the corner. That the reckoning is a balance between whether or not we can keep the darkness at bay with as much light as we can shine. It is always going to be a fight, and that fight happens across for a lot of different people for a lot of different ways.
Yep.
There are some MIB elements that are kind of thrown in with the government.
They even have the flashy... The agents, they
do
have the flashy thing.
They do have a flashy thing.
They even have the flashy thing. I love it.
Where you can get people to forget like the last...
love it.
A few hours or something, yeah.
So there's a tabloid called the Tombstone Epitaph? Yes. The Tombstone Epitaph. It's basically like the National Enquirer that tells tale of all the dark things that go bump in the night, and of course, nobody believes that trash. Tell stories about demons and chupacabras and people coming back from the dead. A bunch of tall tales. Of course, the agents read it religiously, and they're like, oh god, we've got to rein these guys in. They can't let people know that this stuff is actually going on. There would be pandemonium.
Yeah, but you've got all of the problem tropes that exist within the West. You have you're riding on horses. You might be able to get on a train, but it's still going to take you time to get to a place. And all of the problem, it only goes on the track, right? So your destinations are dependent on where you're headed, of where the train's going, and then how you're going to get to the next place. You're hoofing it on foot at times.
Well, right, but keep in mind though, there's this steampunk aspect, right? So. Like they make mention in like the gear and goods section that like you can actually have stuff special delivered to you. If you pay through the nose for it, and you will pay through the nose for it, you can have a straight up ray gun airdropped to you from a gyrocopter. If you're within 50 miles of the nearest city.
Right.
Because that level of tech exists. It's just such a luxury.
Yeah.
It's not commonplace, but if you can pay...
Yeah. It's effectively like the Wells Fargo catalog.
Yeah.
But like done at a different level. Like there are robots that exist because of that company.
Yeah.
Like that are defenders.
It's all because of the ghost rock and the ghost steel, which is basically this like coal that's like rumored to be the crystallized form of damned souls. Fun fact, it actually is.
Yeah, and it is
exactly what they think it is.
It is super dangerous.
It's super dangerous. It burns like thermite.
Yeah.
You have to put it out by smothering it. You can't put water on it because it flash boils.
It's like a road flare in your hand.
Yeah. But it can be used as long as you use ghost steel, which is basically steel made by forging it with ghost rock. You can make like some really cool steam boilers that do amazing things, and thusly from that, a bunch of high-tech stuff is born, know?
And it's neat. And sitting behind all of this within the book as you're reading through it is that you're effectively getting this from a character. There's a character that floats in the book reading to you these things who is the Coot. He's this old Coot who learned everything, who knows all that's going on because he's been embedded in it.
He something happened to him and it pulled him into the future, like I want to say 2049 or something like that.
He made a deal, like he saw what was happening with the Reckoning, made a deal with them, and basically said, "I'll join the army. I'll join the army of the damned. Let's do this thing." And then in that was like, oh, well, there's this like tincture that I can make now that I've learned how to do this stuff that'll show me more. Let me see where we're going with this. Basically drank it, ended up in the future, saw at the end of the Reckoning what things were going to look like. Came back, it was just like, nope. People we need to fix this.
Yep.
I am on that side now. Goodbye. Right? And so he's called you the Marshal, and it's interesting, if you read the book thoroughly enough, you get the feeling that as the Marshal, the storyteller, you might actually be harrowed, and he's kind of helped fix you. Because he even says in it, like, oh, you're awake. Yeah, that thing I poured down your throat has kept you from choking me out again. and telling me the terrible things you said. Let's hope it sticks this time.
Amazing.
And you're like, oh, I'm a bad guy.
I love that the role-playing book itself, in the reading of its own rules and lore, has a meta-narrative.
It does. It really does. And I think that's wonderful because it draws back to some of the early Shadowrun, the White Wolf stuff, where as you read through that, it all fits within that same kind of framework.
Shadowrun was great because it was all like a chat room log.
Yeah.
You'd see like different characters talking about the things that you were reading about. Yeah.
But the game goes then into the book then goes into talking about how to manage things, and one of the things that it outright manages is managing power-hungry characters, because you could easily get that. And if you understand that the world is effectively trying to be damned, and people going ahead and taking power and greed and the things that are vices, it makes sense that you'd look at a power-hungry character and go, okay, you've gotten a big for your britches. Grab a card. What? Grab a card. Okay, that card says this about you. Now you're hunted. By whom? You're not sure. We'll find out soon.
But you've got a lot.
And you know.
And some people don't have a lot, and they want yours.
Yeah. And you know it.
Yep.
Like, this isn't hidden to you. You know it. You can feel it on the back of your neck when someone looks at you as you walk into a saloon. You know? And it's like, okay, that's a little spoopy, you know? And it adds to that fear.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I think that's fantastic. After giving you all of this, there's a full adventure generator that sits on top of this that uses the cards. Again, keep that cards. You're never going to lose them. But it teaches you the basic framework of an adventure, that there is an objective, an obstacle, and a complication, which we've gone over multiple times.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But it's nice to see it spelled out in black and white.
There are very few resources that will explicitly teach you how to put together an adventure with, like, obstacle, objective, complication, and then give you the resources to create that out of their own game world and go, like, look, either here's some ideas, or just flip randomly, because there's random numbers assigned to these. You know?
Yeah, and they flat out say, because of what it is, it's like, this game isn't scaled. Life isn't scaled in the West. We're telling you that this is what the encounter is, and it's up to your players to recognize it's time to go.
Yep.
Like, this isn't something you can just handle.
Yep.
So don't throw resources at it, because that could mean your death, and you should understand that.
That is one thing it took me so long to wrap my brain around, but I appreciate so much about Savage Worlds just in general. When I first switched my D&D 5th edition game over to Savage Worlds, I was like, well, how do you balance encounters?
You don't.
And the answer is indubitably, don't even try. You can't, you don't, and you shouldn't.
No, you shouldn't.
Yep.
So to talk a little bit about what they give you for the world setting. Now, I said in the beginning that the original take was that there really wasn't a lot in there. I'm going to say there's a ton. There's 36 pages of history, lore, and location setting.
It is a 200-page book. Only some of that is rules, and only the rules that are in there aren't even the core Suede rules. They're just the little things that Deadlands has added to make the setting.
Right. There's basically 100 pages of setting and lore.
Yeah.
And it is done in such a way that, like, a city will basically be 2 to 3 small paragraphs explaining in a very quick brushstroke what the city's about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to tell you 10 NPCs in it and everything else. It'll tell you that it's a mining town ran by this evil man bent for greed because he's trying to outdo this other person's name. There's no references to those people.
That's a writing prompt, is what
that's all that is.
Yeah, that's great.
And it basically is giving you the same kind of feeling that it previously did with the adventures, where it's just giving you a general feel for the entirety of the space. Something you could comfortably read to another player who asks, like, hey, what's going on out in this area? Oh, well, that's so-and-so. He's running this kind of a town there. Okay, that's it. That's what you know.
Yeah.
When you get there, things happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Like,
but the important part is then it then equips you with the tools to flush those things out.
Correct.
Yes.
And then it goes for 49 pages talking about NPCs and monsters.
Uh-huh.
And it is nice.
Comes with its own quote-unquote bestiary, you know?
And again, the bestiary is not like, oh, this is how you scale them. It's like, no, this is a chupacabra. It's dangerous. Here's why it's dangerous. Here's how you play it dangerous.
Right.
And it's great. It is fantastic.
They got the little Marshall star next to them to denote which of those monsters and characters are wild cards.
Yep. So you know immediately how dangerous they really are.
Uh-huh.
There's tons of colorful pictures, wonderful descriptions, a lot of flavor inspiration. And in that alone, just flipping through the book, not unlike Morkborg, and how it evokes what it is by its pages, this does the same. And it is so telling of the time when it was written. Mm-hmm. Even though it's been revised, it still feels like a book from the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the style that was done for games during that time period, and you can tell it. You can read it page for page. There's not a lot of soft space. Mm-hmm. Everything is used. Everything is flavor. Everything is baked into the setting. You never leave it. It is metal.
Yeah.
From end to end, the metal of this game is baked into that book.
It is metal, and that metal is ghost steel.
Yeah. It is cowboys and zombies.
Uh-huh.
That is it. Deadlands, straight up, is everything you would expect it to be with those words involved.
Yeah.
And it does it exceptionally well. It is not to say that you cannot tell other stories in it. Just like we always say, the story is only as wide as the character's vision. And they explicitly say it. It took you reading it to me to remind myself to go back and put it into the show here, and that is to say, the Weird West has years of history and extensive mythology that explains its supernatural events. But don't let that overwhelm you. The game doesn't need to include any of it. You can play Deadlands as a straight western, focusing on cowboys and zombies, mysteries, and gunfights, or good old monster hunting on the high plains. Make it your own game, Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just evoking that same rule of, hey, we've given you everything. Choose what you want to use out of this. Don't stick to any of it, but keep the feel.
Yeah.
And I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, when I first started reading it too, I was like, oh, this is a very spooky game with some very dark themes in it. But like, you read that thought and it's like, you know, no, you don't have to include any of that. Make it your own game. Like, you don't have to lean into the whole end of the world, you know, walking on skulls, you know, blood for the blood god sort of stuff.
Right.
You can literally just be like, hey, you're all cowboys, let's shoot some zombies.
This isn't John Constantine of the West.
Right.
It does not have to be
It doesn't have to be, but it can be.
Oh, it totally can be.
Yeah.
It totally can be.
Yeah.
There was a section in it where they were talking about ingesting the metals of the ghost metals. Like, some people will do that.
It's not the metal. It's ground up. It's a ghost rock powder.
Yes.
The mad scientists will sometimes become addicted to it because it's basically radioactive. Like I said, radioactive on a physical and spiritual level.
Yes.
It is evil, not in the way that the devil is evil, but evil in the way that uranium is evil.
And,
you know,
and just that little bit could be a whole story into itself.
Yeah.
And I think it's great.
And there are people who become addicted and will sprinkle it on their food and everything like that to ingest its powers. It's awful.
Mm-hmm. All right.
What does Deadlands do well?
I'm going to say one of the best things that I love about this book, and why I feel that it draws you into the setting, is that it talks to you, the player, the marshal, and it feels like Sam Elliott's having a conversation with you. And I love that. I love that.
I read every bit of this book in Sam Elliott's voice. Like...
We can't do it justice because Sam Elliott has a voice. But seriously, there's a section of this book that I could clearly hear him talking.
Yeah.
That like 6 cigarettes and a half a glass of coffee,
mm-hmm.
black coffee, talking to you in the morning kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I love it. I absolutely love it.
It just drips with flavor, but it doesn't ever get so thick that you don't understand what's going on.
Exactly. You can, if you're familiar with the Wild West
mm-hmm.
and all of its great tropes, you will be familiar with this because everything is just 1 degree in it more.
Yep.
You know, it is gambling magically. It is bandits who are zombies.
It is gunslinging with magical rune-encrusted guns.
Yeah. It's monsters that are real.
Yep.
Yep. It's faith at its finest. It's hope.
Yeah.
And fear.
Yeah.
It's Savage Worlds, without a doubt. Like, simple as that. If you've played Savage Worlds, you will play this.
Fast, fun, furious.
Yep. Yes, it's... I would say to a degree the game almost feels more dangerous than core Savage Worlds, but I kind of feel that that's the West. It's embodying the West, the quick draw, the quick drop,
Yeah.
Where the West was dangerous, without a doubt. There are 10,000 ways to die in the West.
Well, too, you've got to remember that your experience with Savage Worlds is my game.
Right.
And we are playing with the Heroes Never Die special rule, specifically because we've all decided we want a lighter game that's focused more on telling heroic stories than we are about facing death.
Yes, that is true.
This is... I would say this game probably would lose a lot if you played with Heroes Never Die.
Without a doubt, because death is an important part of this game.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
Like, it is a core component.
Mm-hmm.
Because death brings about undeath.
Yeah. Death is a finality, and without... Death is a finality, and death is a tragedy. And without finality and tragedy, you can't lose hope.
Right. And also, like, it begs to ask the question, there's a lot of people here talking about the damned,
mm-hmm.
the evil damned, who go to the battlegrounds. Well...
The hunting grounds.
The hunting grounds.
Yeah.
What happens to the good people? That's not discussed.
That's not really discussed, yeah.
So the question is it just grades of bad? Like,
I don't know.
That's the question to be asked in the story, and I love that. And there's a lot of world building.
Yeah.
I think they do a wonderful job of leaving giant blank holes for you to fill, but at the same time giving you so much spice and flavor and reminding you that you are involved in this I guess a pan-flavored dish, but is undeniably West. Like, we talk about all the flavors of the different types of Mexican. There's Tex-Mex, there's Amerimex, there's classic Mexican food. This is classic Western, right? But with all of these other flavors stacked on top of it. And they just give you with these flavor packets. Like, you go to the store and you look and you're like, oh, I can get this Chipotle flavored, packet, Wild West packet, right? And effectively, that's what this game is giving you, is a series of flavors to throw on top of your story. And it's easy. It makes it like making a quick meal. And I think that's great about it.
Mm-hmm.
The world building is not so bold as to say, this is how it has to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that right there is enough to sell it as something that a storyteller could step into and go, yeah, and get excited.
Yeah.
Without being overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right, so what do we not do well here?
I'm going to straight up say it that the things that I will preface the whole thing by saying I had a hard time finding something I didn't like.
Yes.
But when I did find it, I was like, oh, that is the cringe moment. And that is the way that it depicts the minorities of the time,
mm-hmm.
it kind of it
bears a lot of that 1990s racial insensitivity of there's mystical shaman and magical Chinese punch masters,
because they just didn't want to address it.
Yeah.
And they didn't feel they needed to.
It's always been there, and they're fun tropes, so let's put them in without really kind of considering, like, maybe those were products of their time, and maybe we can...
Yeah, maybe the executive production teams that were involved in making Westerns were a bit insensitive. We're going to be a little more sensitive by using some of the terms that are more appropriate. Like, we're going to talk about nations a little bit more than we're going to talk about, and maybe we shouldn't be using their words. Maybe we should come up with something else, but we're trying to do something historical without doing history. And I think that, to a degree, is disingenuous without going into the details of the problem of why those people are fighting as heroes.
Yeah.
I think it does I think when you look at something like Blood in the Banquet Hall, you're immediately handed the truth right at the beginning of this is what the story explains and why. And I think Deadlands could be better for helping people understand, like you said, like why there were Chinese in the West.
Yeah.
Why are women gunslingers important? In stories, and why should they feel heroic, as heroic as anyone else?
Easy answer. Sharon Stone was hot and Quick and the Dead.
Yes, I will agree with that statement, and Bad Girls was an amazing movie.
Done and dusted.
But the point of the matter is that it's not explained. It's hand-waved away of like, yeah, there was racism and bigotry and classism during that time. If you really want to read about that, go and grab a history book, but we're not going to discuss that here. It's not important.
Right. Yeah, like racism isn't part of our game, and you shouldn't include it. Now go play your stereotypical Indian shaman.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
There's a little tonal disparity there, and again, I don't want to harp on it because I don't think this is a 10 of 10 game killer.
Not in the least.
I think it's a 3 of 10 where you kind of roll your eyes at it and you go, maybe we could have done this better. Maybe we could have worded things better. Maybe I don't lean into those tropes so much at my table. Maybe I make better decisions.
Yeah, and they don't do a negative disparagement to it.
Yeah,
and that's I really want to say that is that
these are heroes.
Yeah, they've never once in this book said that these people are lesser. They've never once said that these people are anything other than a hero.
But a positive stereotype is still a stereotype, and we're still leaning on those.
Right, and so this is less of a what does this do wrong, and more of like what could be done in the future.
Yeah,
they come out with a 30th edition. Maybe put a little bit more in there. Well, lean into some of the people and ask them what would be a good way to represent this.
Right.
And I think that would make a huge difference.
Yep.
I think it would really be fantastic. So,
I
mean, even if, because I will say, in closing, I'll say this about that, and that is that they did discuss slavery and how it was abolished and why that was so important, and the deaths that occurred with the slaves and the fights for civil rights during the Civil War. And it was only a few paragraphs that they discussed that and the impact that had. I think that was well done. At the same time, they kind of just glossed over everything else.
Yeah.
And that's where there was a slide to it.
Yeah.
So that's it. That was all that I really want to say there. So, anything else you want to throw at this one?
No,
other than the fact that you want to run this game.
I either want to run it or I want to play it. Like this is one of those games that like instantly jumped to the top of my list because it was just so much flavor, and I already love Savage Worlds so much, and seeing it used in such a great way for such a great setting that I could just taste on every page. I may have licked the book. I did not lick the book. I downloaded it in PDF.
Yes.
But instantly had me thinking of a character I'd want to play. Instantly had me thinking of different plot lines I would run if I were the marshal.
Yep. You got excited.
Yeah, I got excited.
I got excited about it.
I got excited about this game. Yeah, I would, and I straight up am considering I've talked before about how I wanted to run Adventure Tales of the Aeon Society after my my Tamriel's game's done. I might run Deadlands instead. I don't know.
Run a couple sessions.
Yeah.
Just keep it simple.
Yeah.
Try not to run a 3-act super campaign.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's our agreement for our next games.
No more super campaigns.
No more super campaigns.
Gotcha.
We're gonna run small.
We're coming up on Act 3. We're coming up on Act 3 on mine.
Sure.
It's not going to go 15 years. It might only go 3 more years.
I know where you're at. I'm not going to say anything negative.
Act 2 is an interlude. Act 3 is going to be big. I'm not going to lie. But
how many years there?
It is the home stretch. It might only be 3 years.
Okay.
All right.
Fair enough. So next week's topic, we're going deep.
This is like philosophy 304. We are talking about the overt Christian and patriarchal influence in divinity representation in TTRPGs.
Yeah.
I.e., when you see a pantheon of gods, why does it act like that?
Yeah.
And why is it portrayed like that? And why is it viewed through such a Judeo-Christian lens? I know Judeo-Christian's a bad term for it. I'm sorry for using that. Through a lens of, like, Christianity dominated, like, good and evil, angels and demons. But it's polytheistic. It's not polytheistic in practice, you know?
Yeah, and we're going to examine some other systems while we're going into this a little bit, but mostly just talking about how it's such a commonplace.
It really is, yeah.
Like, once you start filing the serial numbers off of stuff, you realize everything kind of feels the same, and you're like, uh-oh. Like, who's been writing this stuff?
But I'm sure it'll turn into a treatise on how, you know, when you're creating your own setting, how you can make a decent pantheon and a decent system of worship for the gods that you put into your game and stuff like that. So,
yeah. So,
anyhow, you can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us up on our Discord. We'd love to hear from you there. Throw some questions at us. We'd love to answer them on the air. Shoot some questions to the other great storytellers that dwell there and get some advice on running your campaign and whatnot. You can find that link on our Twitter as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members who help us out every single month, especially our named members, Knox in the Box Sam, Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Veteran, and Hulu. We truly appreciate all your support. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems or on Instagram at Arcane Anthems. Our intro music you heard was Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find them at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on YouTube Music, I should say. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find them at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us. All of our families, friends who've sat with us at our tables over these years to give these great stories to share with you. And you, every single one of our posse. We love every single one of y'all.
Love y'all. Good night.